What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Vegan Yak. I'm Walter, and today I think you're in for a real treat because I interviewed someone who was born and raised vegan, which, yeah, is pretty rare. So I think it's a really interesting perspective. I interviewed Sarina with Born Vegan, and we get into a wide variety of topics. We talk about how her health is, we talked about what it was like growing up being vegan, if she felt isolated, if she felt brainwashed. We talk about what the hardest part about being vegan is nowadays. We just get into a wide variety of topics, and I think it's a really interesting perspective. So I think you're gonna really enjoy it. So go grab a cup of coffee, grab a meal, and enjoy the video. Oh yeah, and don't forget to like the video, and if you're looking for some more information about veganism or some info and tips on how to successfully go vegan and stay vegan, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell down below, so that way next week when I've got a new video coming out and I'm yakking about something else vegan, you'll be the first to know. Enjoy the interview. All right, welcome everybody. Today, very excited to have a special guest. Sarina, a fellow vegan YouTuber, is here with me. So welcome Sarina with Born Vegan, which, if you couldn't tell by the name of it, means, she was born vegan and raised vegan, which is crazy rare. So Sarina, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be pretty amazing to get your perspective. And if anybody hasn't gone over and checked out her channel yet, you should definitely do that. Check out Born Vegan. I'll link it in the description down below, so that way you can have easy access. But getting that type of perspective is really great. And I think my audience and everybody would have a good time getting this perspective. So I've got a bunch of questions. Let's go ahead and start digging in on them. The first thing that I wanted to ask, we're going to just get personal right away, is about health, because most people think that like veganism is maybe not healthy at all, or at least can't be sustained long term. Like many people think it's impossible to be vegan long term. So the first question I have is just like, when did you die? You know?
Yesterday, I mean, obviously.
Yeah. I knew you were suffering from kwashiorkor, but I didn't know, when the actual date of death was. No, the first question, just because I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but is, how was your health growing up as a kid? How is your health now? Have you had any health issues? Is it possible to be healthy as a lifelong vegan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the first thing I'll say too, veganism is not a cure-all. You still get colds being a vegan, normal life stuff. But aside from that, no major protein deficiencies or weak bones from not drinking cow's milk or anything like that. I did competitive gymnastics when I was younger for about 7 years, and then I ran cross country in college. I've ran a half marathon as well, and while I'm not a world class, bodybuilder or anything like that, it certainly hasn't held me back. And I remember going to the doctor when I was younger and doing gymnastics. And this happened with my sister as well. My mom would take us and they'd be like, "You're not drinking cow's milk? Like how, this is really dangerous, and you're doing gymnastics and you're going to have such weak bones." They'd want to like test us for calcium, and they'd take our calcium levels. And I remember several times doctors basically being amazed, like getting our numbers and going, you're fine. Like you don't drink any cow's milk? Really?
Like such a crazy thought that you could possibly get calcium anywhere else.
Right.
Yeah. So when you were doing competitive gymnastics, did you ever like, you said it never held you back. Did you ever have anybody like ever like scoff at you a little bit more, or say something along the lines of like, "Oh, well, you could be doing XYZ. You could be doing so much better if you just eat some meat or drink some milk or whatever." Did you have that going on a lot?
I don't remember that from gymnastics, honestly. And I was like, 7 or 8 years old. So, people or parents may have made those comments. I don't remember them, but I definitely got those in college from friends when I was doing cross country. And they'd be like, "Well, don't you think you could be running even faster if you were eating meat? And, you could be doing this." And definitely making those comments then.
Well, what would be your typical response to something like that then in college when you're getting those types of comments? What would you say back?
I mean, often I'd turn around and say, "Well, don't you ever wonder how much better your recovery time could be if you weren't eating meat? Haven't you seen the science and what it says about recovery time?" And I think there are people from a health perspective that are excellent athletes that do eat animal products and that don't. But I think a lot of science does show immense benefits. Look at the Game Changers film and all of that for recovery time and endurance, and of course, long-term health. And just because you have the biggest muscles and can lift the most doesn't mean you're actually the healthiest long-term either.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It certainly seems like more and more science is coming out for not only the healthiness of it, but thriving for athletes. And obviously, we're seeing a lot more athletes start to turn towards plant-based diets for those reasons. So I assume that will become more and more common knowledge, but I also assume that it would be weird getting those comments potentially for a lifetime, especially before things like the Game Changers was out and, publicly available with the internet and everything else. So
Yeah.
different life. So within your childhood, so many people think that, because I have kids, and people ask me, do they eat vegan when they're with me and stuff like that, and they think that like raising your kids is just totally brainwashing them. They think it's an absurd thought or idea. Do you feel like you were brainwashed as a child?
I have been accused of being brainwashed many, many times. That's definitely very common. And even more than that, accusing my parents of, forcing their values on me. And I sort of look at it like that's a parent's job. You are supposed to impart your values, whether it's simple things like teaching your children to share and not steal and be compassionate and kind and whatever it is, that is what a parent's job is. And parents that are feeding their kids meat and dairy are forcing or brainwashing their children as much, if not more, than any vegan parent is, because, part of the definition of brainwashing is it's keeping other information from getting to them and sort of filling someone's head with propaganda and misinformation, which is what the meat and dairy industries are based on. They are based on unscientific and unethical propaganda and advertising, the Got Milk campaigns and, billboards. Like everywhere you go in the world, there's advertising, there's messaging, there's TV telling people they have to eat and drink, dairy to have strong bones, to get enough protein, all of these sorts of things. So all my parents did was tell me the truth. And they did teach me their values of compassion and justice. And if we don't have to harm others unnecessarily, then why do so? And to me, it's really as simple as that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I have the same value. I mean, I teach my children, I teach them both sides of the coin. And I guess like, that's what I would ask you is like, do you remember what those conversations were like when you were a kid? Do you remember early on, like your parents going like, hey, yeah, everyone here is going to be like eating animals and like how foreign that must seem to you, because the only thing that you had known is obviously you would probably never think of eating animals, would be my guess. Do you remember what those conversations were like, or what like the first conversation is that you remember that kind of was around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had so many of them from a very early age. I know it started with breastfeeding a lot. And I don't remember this with myself, but with my younger sister, when she was breastfeeding, I know my mom regularly had conversations like, oh, what milk do you want? Do you want cow's milk? Do you want giraffe's milk? Do you want dog's milk? No, we want mommy's milk. And so it was just like little funny things like that, where she was laying the foundation for, if you think it's absurd to ask your kid if they want to drink dog's milk, it's equally absurd to ask if they want to drink cow's milk. And so she was, especially my mom, constantly laying that foundation of, we don't drink other animals' milk. We don't eat other animals because we love them. And we would have, we'd be eating like soy cheese or vegan meat. Or I remember in particular, like eating vegan hot dogs when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and wanting another one. And just again, in everyday conversations, she would kind of play with me and I'd be like, oh, I want another hot dog. And she'd be like, what kind of hot dog are you eating? And I'd be like, I want a veggie hot dog. She's like, you don't want a meat one? Why not? Well, we don't eat animals, and that's what, real hot dogs are. So just, it was just all over. And my mom was also an activist. And so we would go to vegan conferences and protests. Like I was involved in all of that as well from a pretty early age. So I did have other support, other people around me, but it was constantly part of our conversation. And when it came to, friends or birthday parties or places where I'd go where things weren't vegan, like we made it clear. So that's why we were always distinguishing, like, we eat veggie hot dogs. Yeah, what they're eating might look similar, but it's not, and we don't eat that. So it was just all over all the time in our lives.
Yeah. Did you ever answer, I want dog milk?
No.
Your mom never said, okay, fine, that's what you're getting, some dog milk. How long were your parents vegan for, prior to, having you and then raising you vegan? Do you know?
Yeah, so my mom was actually a microbiologist. She worked for Merck, a large pharmaceutical company. And she
My
went
mom as well,
vegan.
just so you know how odd.
Really? Okay.
On the sales side, though, not a biologist. Yeah.
Yeah, she had a special position that was both. So she was like a scientific sales specialist. So she saw both the sales side and the science side, which is really unique. And most people are only on one or the other. And part of her job took her into animal testing facilities, chicken hatcheries, as she sort of had to survey the environment to sell her products to them. And so that was in, around 1990. And while she was working that job, she decided to go vegan. And she had not met my dad yet. And when they met, she was vegan and still working that job. And he never heard of veganism. He was a meat and potatoes, Midwest Kansas kind of person. And then my mom decided, while she was, seeing what she was seeing, that she wanted to raise children that would stand up to injustice. And when they saw something problematic, like what she was seeing in some of these facilities, that we wouldn't just go along with it, that we would feel confident in speaking out. And so that was when she made the decision to raise us vegan. And my dad agreed. He agreed that he would set the example in our home and in front of us. But within a few months of me being born, he was also vegan. So she was vegan for like 2 years before I was born, I think.
Interesting. And have they stayed vegan? Are they still vegan today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The whole kit and caboodle. I assume your sister then as well?
Yep.
Do you have other siblings, or is it just your little sister?
Just the two of us. Yeah.
The two of you and a whole vegan family. Exciting.
Yeah.
You touched on the social gatherings and going and seeing, obviously other children are not all vegan stuff. First of all, I guess, did you have any other friends that were vegan when you were younger that was in your social circles?
Yeah, I did. So one is we attended vegan conferences every year. And one in particular is called Vegan Summerfest. It's one of my favorite conferences to this day. It's so amazing. It's a 5-day all-encompassing, like you stay on a college campus, and they have, food demos, cooking classes, evening parties, plenary sessions, speakers, and they also had a kids center. And so we would go there every summer. It was kind of our family vacation. And so although that was not in our area, that was probably one of the most incredible experiences for me it really helped me remain confident, because I would meet other kids that were vegan, that were being raised vegan, some older than me who are some of my best friends to this day, that were kind of like mentors or older siblings that, during the year when things were going on or I had issues, that I stayed in touch with them and could call them up and, explain what was going on or hear their thoughts. So I had that community with other vegan kids my age, and the mentors. And then locally, we did have sort of a play group where several of the other families were vegetarian or vegan. Most of them were not really in it for the animal rights, and many of them, it's been years since I've seen them, and I don't think many of them are vegan to this day. But at that time, like at least some of our family potlucks would be vegan, and our friends, events like that. But yeah, so I definitely had friends that were vegetarian, or that we had social gatherings that were vegetarian or vegan.
Yeah. So when you're going to an event then that's not, vegan, on a typical kid's birthday party or whatever it is growing up, did you feel like you were missing out? Like, did you feel like you were, somewhat isolated or yeah, missing out, I guess, on what everybody else was doing at the time?
Um, Occasionally, but mainly, most of the time when I was really little and we did something like that, my parents would make sure to bring, like, if they were having cupcakes, my parents would get or make a vegan cupcake and bring that. And part of the way we solved a lot of that is when we were going places, my parents brought food. They would offer, like, oh, do you want us to cook an additional cake? Do you want us to bring snacks? That way I would have something that I could eat so I wouldn't feel left out. And for the most part, I didn't. I can remember, getting into like 6th or 7th grade when I went to like school birthday parties that were like at restaurants that didn't really have any vegan options. There was like, oh yeah, like I'm sitting here, eating a baked potato or a salad around people eating things that are different. And so I didn't always have the same option, but then at school birthday parties and things like that, again, my parents would send vegan treats. So, and it wasn't always an exact mimic of what the other kids had. Like, so just because they were having cake didn't mean I would get cake, but I'd get something that I liked usually. So, I noticed it, and there were times where I was like, oh yeah, like they're all eating cake. I want something that looks like that. But for the most part, it wasn't a big deal to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, props to your parents because it is hard. I completely, we bring food literally everywhere that we go. Not only for ourselves, but especially for our kids. And anytime that we have an event at school or anything like that, like we're bringing vegan pizza or bringing a vegan cupcake or something else, which is really easy to do. It's not a difficult thing, but it's one more step of like preparation compared to everybody else who's just going there. So we try our hardest to make sure that the kids aren't feeling isolated and left out, but I'm sure there is still a time here or there where they're thinking, oh man, everybody's doing this. And yeah, they didn't get the exact same cake or whatever it is. And then, maybe there's a little bit feeling of missing out on something. Um, Now that you're an adult, you've continued on and obviously decided to stay vegan and start a channel around veganism and spreading awareness. What made you decide to continue to be vegan? Because obviously growing up, you're totally brainwashed and indoctrinated, but then past the brainwashing, you then become an independent person, but you still decided to continue this lifestyle. So what was it for you that made you want to continue on?
So my parents actually gave me my own food choices when I was about 7 years old.
Hmm.
And personally, I think they were very smart in how they went about doing this. But they basically, up until that point, they had been making my decisions for me about what I ate. They put food in front of me. They sent me with lunches. But even as a kid, even when you get to be 7, 8 years old or middle school, you can't control what your kids are eating. You can send them with a vegan lunch and they can go to school and trade with their friends, or a friend can offer them something. Like, you're not going to be there in every situation, obviously. And so my parents decided they didn't want to be in that position of like having me feel like they were actively controlling my choices when I was away from home. Like, it was always clear, no matter what, our home was going to be vegan. Like, that was never negotiable. There was never like oh yeah, like even with when friends came out, like we had a meat free zone sign on the door and asked other people not to bring animal products into our home. So, but they
We
basically,
have the same sign at our door.
but yeah, they didn't want to feel like, I was sort of being controlled at that point when I was away from home at birthday parties or with friends. And there were lots of other things besides veganism that I didn't eat. Like, they're pretty health conscious, and they also didn't feed me things that had high fructose corn syrup or artificial food colorings in them at that point. So those were also on the list of sort of things we didn't eat. So they decided when I was 7 and I had learned to read that I was now old enough to make my food decisions, make food choices for myself. And so it was not framed as, you don't have to be vegan anymore, or you can choose to not be vegan. It was just, we've been deciding what you eat. Now you get to decide what you eat. And so I had this stack of note cards with a bunch of different ingredients on them, things like whey protein, casein, gelatin, red dye, all of the different ingredients that up until that point I hadn't eaten, both for health reasons and for ethical vegan reasons. And they were all put into these note cards, and I had to learn to read every one of these words and items, and then be able to explain what they were, how it was made, and why we didn't eat them. So that meant that I had to learn, oh, gelatin, like here's what goes into gelatin. It's all these leftover slaughterhouse byproducts, and that's why we don't eat them. And so then once I had all that knowledge and information, then it was like, when you are out on your own, you now get to be the one to read labels and decide if you want to eat this product or not. And so the only thing that really changed for me at that point, still being 7, I still found my parents also very influential and persuasive. And so I absolutely stayed vegan. I didn't choose anything different there. All it really changed at that point was, in gymnastics, when we'd get goodie bags that had candy and a friend would say, oh, why can't you have this? Or you can't have this. I would say, oh no, I can have it. I choose not to have it. And do you know what gelatin is made of anyway? And then I would proceed to graphically describe how gelatin comes to be. So that was like really the age at which I think I really started becoming an activist, but also when I decided for myself, armed with the information I had, that I wanted to keep doing this. And as I got older and like, especially into college, I made it to college actually before ever intentionally eating artificial coloring. And then I got to college, and a lot of the health stuff went out the window a little bit at that point, but ethical veganism never did. And that's where sort of that distinguishing factor of, well, these were health reasons that we didn't do this for, but these were ethical reasons. Yeah, so I think hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it totally did. Yeah. So it seems like, yeah, you continued on at that point. So it seems like at a young age, your parents focused mostly on education, a little bit of persuasion maybe, and a lot of brainwashing, I'm sure. And, then into college years, I think I even saw in one of your videos that you were talking about, that was maybe more when you started to get challenged a little bit more and probably got a little bit higher brow of challenges, because as you're explaining to a fellow 7-year-old what gelatin is, they're probably just like, wow, that's gross. But in college, they're maybe giving you more philosophical reasons or some other sort of type of typical response that a non-vegan would give. So were you challenged at that point in time? And was there ever a point in time where you thought you might not be vegan?
There has never been a point where I have at all considered not being vegan. But yes, there were intellectual challenges, and I had friends that were philosophy majors. There was a big sustainability emphasis at the school I went to. And so a lot of push for, grass-fed, free range. I know people, and in Kansas here as well, that are against factory farming, for example, but think that the ethical option is to raise and slaughter your own animals. And so I had friends or peers, should I say, that would invite me like, oh, you should come over and help us or watch us kill animals, like, and see this. And I got into clashes with some of these people around activism because they would say, oh, well, if you're against factory farming, why don't you work with us to help the dining hall get, free range beef or some more humane animal products in the dining hall? And I was like, yes, I'm against factory farming, but my bigger issue is I'm against killing animals for food. So no, I'm not going to help you get like more humane, because I don't think that exists, animal products into the dining hall. If you want to work to get plant-based products in the dining hall with me, we can work on that together. So I got frustrated in some of the conversations, and I would go down rabbit holes where people would send me some of the most bizarre, if you want to, it's out there. Like there's some blog called like Let Them Eat Meat or something. And I got into these like really deep rabbit holes of roundabout logic, and I would get really frustrated. And I have a history of being a debater. I was a competitive debater in high school. So not being able to like win an argument logically or prove every single point could be frustrating for me, still is sometimes. And Yeah, I definitely would spend hours like trying to write rebuttals or come up with things to respond to people. And it did make me think. Like there were times where there were some arguments that I kind of couldn't wrap my head around or couldn't fully put a response into words. But it never, I've always had a really strong, more gut instinct. Maybe it's my spiritual perspective as well. But I think it's really easy to get caught up in the gray areas. And that's where this would, like, where do you draw the line? What about bacteria? What about, like AI? Aren't they, aren't computers sentient now? And, strange arguments.
Rabbit
And
holes for sure. Yeah, wow.
yeah, and so I would get really caught up, not on the like, should we eat animals, but like they would try and drag out these intellectual, philosophical discussions to these gray areas. And at some point I kind of just had to say, yeah, the world is gray. There are lots of things that I may not have the answer to, but I know what I do have the answer to, which is if we can live happy and healthy lives without killing animals that obviously experience pain and suffering and pleasure, and then why do so? And you know what? I may not have the answer on where to draw the line or how to be 100% perfect and have no footprint in this world, but I'm doing the best I can. And there's really no good reason that I can see to kill and eat animals. So that's all we really need to worry about right now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. It's occasional that I get a troll or something that starts to push the boundaries of like, yeah, especially when they try to attack your perfection and get into some logical fallacy there. And you're like, yeah, no, I'm not perfect, but that doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't defeat the vegan argument. But it's over over a lifetime. And you don't have to say your age if you don't want to, but I assume you're at least over 20.
Yeah, 26.
26. So 26 years of being vegan. What do you think is the most common like excuse that you get or like, point of argument that you get when talking to people about veganism?
Ooh, I get a lot
Yeah.
that repeat. I mean, the most honest one, which is what I think is really the main excuse, is people like meat.
Mhm.
Many people are not often honest, and the protein one, the protein and health one, that's probably the most common excuse. Well, I work out, well, I can't get enough protein, I need meat for protein. I'd say that one really comes up, but again, I think the most honest excuse is really people like meat and don't want to give it up, and they put up these other excuses to justify their behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to run a couple of really common excuses by you and see what your perspective is on them because I would like to know how someone that's been vegan for 26 years answers them.
Okay.
So, what do you say when someone says, I can't get enough protein on a vegan diet?
So I personally am a big fan at this point of the Socratic method,
Mhm.
and I try not to straight up answer people's questions unless they are genuinely like really asking, like, I want to go vegan, how do I get enough protein or how to do this? So my common response to that at this point is, where do you think gorillas get their protein? Where do you think the cows you're eating get their protein? And I kind of start with that and go from there. And if I have to talk, I will come down and say, my degree is in biochemistry. Do you know what protein actually is? It's made up of 20 essential amino acids, which neither humans nor other animals produce. All 20 essential amino acids have to be consumed. They are only produced by plants. So animals have to consume those amino acids to build their muscle and make protein. And we can either consume animals that have already consumed those amino acids, or we can consume the amino acids directly and cut out the animal.
Okay, I thought for sure you would just show them a picture of yourself or have them pinch you and just be like, I'm alive. But that's fair. That's a
I
fair.
do that too. I mean, it really depends on the situation. And like I said, I usually like to ask them questions, and that's kind of how I figure out where to go with the conversation at this point is, why do you think you need that? Or do you know what protein actually is? And then I will tell people, yeah, and guess what? I'm a lifelong vegan. I've never eaten meat, and I've done gymnastics, run half marathons. Like, I'm not dead yet.
Yeah, that might be a similar answer to this one because I have a lot of people that will. I feel like protein, even in the last 3 years of me being vegan, I feel like it's becoming less and less of the go-to excuse.
Mhm.
I feel like that knowledge, especially with things like Game Changers coming out and stuff, is starting to like go away a little bit from the norm of excuses.
Uh-huh.
When anybody has like a little bit more knowledge of it, they then start to point to like, oh, I would be healthy or I would be a vegan, but I can't because of XYZ nutrient, or you can't be healthy long term because you'll eventually get a deficiency. Look at the people that left veganism, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
what would you say to that?
So honestly, I am not spending a whole lot of time engaging with people that like truly don't seem interested. Like, I like to focus, even like I do street outreach a lot where I talk to people on the street and we show footage. And if people come by and say something where they're like antagonistic or, well, I can't, whatever. Um, I often skip that conversation and talk to people that actually are interested. But I have heard lots of people, they have, this autoimmune disease, or in college, someone said, oh, well, I'm gluten intolerant and this and that. My diet consists of Chex Mix and skim milk. So don't take that away from me because that's all I can eat, And one thing I'll say is I am, for the most part, gluten-free myself, and that's a whole other story. But it is completely possible to be vegan and gluten-free. It is completely possible to be vegan and do no grains, or, there's a huge variety of foods and nutrients. And depending on the specific thing they're talking about, I will bring up what science I do know. I know people that have reversed or really eliminated symptoms from their Crohn's disease, which they were originally told they couldn't do. They couldn't go vegan because they had Crohn's. And in fact, the reality was eating more fiber slowly over time and cutting out more animal protein really helped their Crohn's disease. And it depends what that specific thing that someone's talking about is. Omega-3s, of course. I talk about,
Hot one, the hot topic nowadays.
yeah,
The
getting
new
that.
protein argument.
Yeah. And the main thing I go to with that is there are a couple really good studies that show if you think you need to eat fish or fish oil, that the heavy metal contamination and negative health impacts of that actually outweigh, neurotoxicity level wise, they outweigh any positive impact that you're getting from the benefit of eating fish oil. And thus far, that does not seem to be true with algae-based vegan DHA and omega-3s. And again, I ask, where do you think the fish are getting their omega-3s from? They're getting it from plants in the sea. So we can go straight to the source again and cut out the animal part.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fun one to tackle nowadays because it's at least something different. So it's something new. So with the real excuse that people are giving, what do you think is the real excuse of like they just don't want to give up their tastes, their habit, their traditions, which I agree with. I think that really is the main thing. It's an interesting thing to talk about, and I think your perspective will be really interesting because I feel like the most common line is, oh, I would go vegan, but I could never give up blank.
Mhm.
Like I could never give up steak, or I could never give up bacon, but bacon though, right? So like that's like the common line of thought.
Mhm.
And then people, like the most common question that I get asked is like, well, what's the food that you miss the most? You know, which I don't feel like I miss any foods because there's either an alternative that's amazing or I just don't really care. I've never been like super picky as an adult with my eating, but for you, you can't miss foods because you've never had them. So people can't really say, what's the food you miss the most? But I assume they do ask like, have you ever wanted to try XYZ food or anything like that? Or do you wonder what this tastes like and you don't know what you're missing out on? I'm assuming that is said to you. So
Yeah.
are there foods that you have, wanted to try that were animal-based foods ever, or, were there any that you were curious, like what the taste was or anything like that?
Not at all. The closest I've come to wanting to eat animal-based foods are when I see foods that I have eaten vegan versions of, like cake or, ice cream, things that like visibly look the same. And if I'm somewhere where there isn't a vegan option, like, yes, sometimes I look at a chocolate cake and go, oh man, chocolate cake sounds really good right now. But I'm thinking, of course, of the vegan chocolate cakes I've had that I might not have in that moment. And they visibly look the same, but I never look at meat and think meat or eggs. And most of the time, when it comes to cheese or milk, all I can see when I look at it is the violence that I know goes into it. And so it doesn't look appealing to me at all. And actually I taught high school until recently, and some of my students would ask me this, and I usually turn the question around when people ask me that and say, don't you feel like you're missing out because you've never tried dog meat? What about roadkill? Doesn't that look good to you?
For some people, maybe.
Maybe, but the vast majority, and so that my take is like, yeah, roadkill and dog meat are probably as appealing to you as cow meat and pig meat are to me.
Hmm. That's a good one. I mean, that won't apply necessarily to me, but yes, I will still put that in my brain. It's interesting with the roadkill part too, because it seems like some people will start to bring that up as an argument too, of like, well, what if I just ate roadkill? I'm like, really? That's okay. Yeah. I mean, if you're a roadkill type of person, then
Yeah.
2 thumbs up. Go you. Um, So talking about food then, and obviously veganism is not just a diet, but it's so much of the focus because it's 3 times a day. You're not buying clothes 3 times a day and other things, or going to the circus 3 times a day. So it's such a large part of the focus. You have 26 years of eating probably amazing vegan food. What's the best dish? What's the best dish you've ever had?
Ooh, oh, that's such a hard one. I really like a good vegan lasagna.
Mm,
Like, that is really good. Um, I like everything. There isn't a lot I don't like. I don't like cilantro. That's about the only.
you're one of those, huh? Okay.
I am one of those. um, but I love tomatoes. Like, I will literally eat them plain, like
Oh,
several a day if I could.
my son, he'll just like go to town on like the little grape tomatoes or whatever they are. Is all cherry
Yeah,
tomatoes. He just
yeah.
pops them in.
But I really like a good lasagna, eggplant parmesan lasagna, actually, where you like, my mom used to take eggplant slices and bread them, dip them in batter and bread them, and then use that instead of just pasta layers. And that was really good. That was one of my favorite dishes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I love Indian curries too. That's like a
Mhm.
lot of what I cook right now.
Curry sounds so good right now. I had curry the other day, but it still sounds really good right now. Um, yeah, and lasagna, it's interesting. We just tried a plantain lasagna for the first time. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but my fiance made that for her video, and I was like really thinking it was going to be pretty disgusting, and I was surprised at how good it was. I was like, oh dang, this is like almost better than normal lasagna. So
Nice.
replace the noodles, y'all, if you don't want that gluten. um, the lasagna could still taste good. Um, the other part about growing up, and I think this was kind of some of the last bit about the growing up that I had, was just it must be weird to watch everybody normalize something that you were raised up against. For everybody else that's vegan now, it's we came from that and then like kind of like broke out of it, and had our mindset changed. For you, you grew up watching people just normalize that, and like, is it hard for you to not be judgmental of other people, like because you've been vegan your whole life, you haven't contributed intentionally to the animal suffering for that reason, and then you see all these people just normalize it, post their pictures of bacon, all this sort of stuff. Like, how hard is it for you to not be judgmental?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When I was really little, the way that my parents kind of explained it to me because we were talking about the ethics then, and I think that is a normal thing, like to come back and be like, well, if I love animals and, and I don't want to hurt them, why are my friends over there? Well, why are they hurting animals? That's, a very normal question. And so at that age, my parents kind of said, well, they don't know what we know. Like you know this information, they don't know it. And so, kind of they don't know any better. And while that explanation, I think it's good and works for a small child, the other thing that led to was I believed then all I needed to do was give them the information, and then obviously they would choose to do what I was doing. So that definitely contributed to making me an activist, and I would bring flyers, graphic flyers, and literally hold them in friends' faces when they were like eating a burger, being like, see, here's the animal that came from, and look at this process at this slaughterhouse. And I did not win friends with my teacher in that particular time, nor some of the students, but some of them went vegetarian. So so like that was, as a small child, I really kind of believed, and I'm sure from what I've heard from other people that a lot of new vegans feel that way, like, well, I just learned this information, I need to share this information, and people will obviously change when they learn what I learned. So I had that kind of mentality as a child, and the older I got, the more, I've realized that is not the only thing going on here. That does not explain why people keep doing what they're doing. And it has been hard at times. And yeah, there are definitely times where I have felt somewhat judgmental. And I don't always think that judging an action is a bad thing. Like most people are judgmental of drunk driving. We see that that's harmful. That doesn't mean we don't like the person or people that sometimes end up in those situations or do those things, but we accept it as okay to judge that action. So I think it can be okay to judge an action, and I do believe that the action of unnecessarily killing animals for food is immoral. But that said, having grown up my whole life, seeing this, having tried to share information with people many different ways, I also see how deeply it is programmed into people, how deep the brainwashing and propaganda goes. And that does give me a lot of compassion for people. And I've had people ask me, like, oh, are you, not friends with people who aren't vegan? And no, that's not true at all. Like, I still believe people are wonderful, good people, even if they know the information and they haven't changed, that there are so many other factors, psychological and societal, that I don't, like, and I see a difference too between people who openly say, I don't think there's anything wrong with killing animals. Like, to me, there's a difference between that and someone who says, yeah, I agree with you, I see this, but I just love meat, or I'm addicted to it, or it's just too hard right now. Like, at least we're more on the same page, and they recognize that maybe veganism is the ideal, and eventually that's how the world should be, in a place we should get to. But they recognize, maybe it's not morally defensible. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to navigate for sure. And I have had clashes with friends over this issue many of times. But I do have a lot of compassion for people, and I really see that there are so many different circumstances and factors that influence people's ability to live vegan.
Yeah. I think you hit on a really good point, because I think, just real talk, it gets harder and harder to not judge the person, because I agree with judging the act, but it gets harder and harder to not judge the person the more you get into it. Right away, they have no knowledge of it. It's like, it's pretty easy to just go, look, I was at that, at least for me, I was at that point at one point in time too, where I had no knowledge of it. Then I gained the knowledge and I decided to change. So someone that doesn't have any knowledge about it, you're just kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. No judgment. Then it's like they have knowledge and they're actively fighting it, and you're like, okay, you really tested me here, I'm trying not to. And then it gets into the other area where they're just like full blown, like just trolling you and just trying to be like really difficult about it, and just mocking you or whatever it is. And then it's like, Okay, all right. I'll try my hardest to not judge still. And I try to chalk it up as a, well, at least I maybe planted a seed,
Mhm.
and something will maybe eventually come out of it. But sometimes that situation is really hard. Like, do you think that that's the hardest part of being vegan, or do you think it's something else?
For me, for sure. I mean, and growing up that way, like it was definitely, there are definitely times where I had felt very sad and frustrated at the state of the world. Like, how can I see this thing that seems so obvious and blatant to me, and yet no one around me can see this? No one around me looks at this the way I do. Like, what is wrong with the world? What is wrong with society? Um, I've definitely had those thoughts a lot. And that's for sure for me, the hardest part is feeling like it can be, lonely. It can be frustrating when you feel like you see an injustice that no one else around you sees as an injustice. And it's just normal to them.
Yeah. What tips or advice, like what do you do in that situation for yourself? Because you have obviously much more, experience and years of experience than I do in that situation. What do you find is like your go-to to try to deal with that? Because I also, over the past 3 years, definitely have had times where it's just like, yeah, no, it's totally hopeless. We're going down and it's over. Like the world is done. And obviously, I have other days where I'm like, this is great. We're making such great progress. But there are certainly days, especially when arguing with certain people, that they trigger you a little bit and you just go, man, yeah, there is no hope here. Like, what tips or what would you have? What would you say to that, with what you do when you are dealt that?
Yeah. So I sort of simultaneously hold two things in my head. One, on some level, I really truly believe that the future is going to be vegan. I really believe that the scales will tip and everyone, or for the most part, most people will eventually see what we're doing to animals as an injustice, and veganism will be the norm. At the same time, I also hold this very deep cynicism and like, wow, we are screwed. And so somehow I kind of just hold both of those simultaneously in my head. But the thing that gives me hope that I try to focus on the positive side is the changes I have seen. And those are incredible. Like when I graduated from high school in 2012, I didn't know a single other vegan at my high school. Meeting another vegetarian at the high school, it was like, oh my goodness, we have so much in common. Like we're, like that. It was like me being vegan and another vegetarian. They were really cool. And then, fast forward 4 years later, my sister graduates and she meets, 5 other vegans at the high school. And that's, like more normal. One of her teachers showed cowspiracy to the AP environmental science class. And there's that. Now, fast forward, I know people that have gone to high school and it's like, oh yeah, like there's like, and even for me today, meeting people in my town, I used to think I knew every vegan in my city. And if I didn't, it was like when I met someone and found out they're vegan, it was like, oh, wow, how have we not met? Like, oh, you haven't been to our potlucks? So like, I really believed that I should know every vegan in our city. And that is so not how I feel today. Like, there are so many people I meet all over the place. And it's just people, it's so much more the norm. There are so many more people eating plant-based diets or calling themselves and identifying as vegan. There are so many more vegan options. I sat down last year, I was getting on a plane flight to go to a vegan conference actually, and I overhear the couple that I sit next to just casually talking about the Impossible Burger, I think, or maybe Beyond Burger, I'm not sure, one of them. And I'm like, oh, are you guys vegan? They're like, oh, no, we just run a restaurant. And, we were trying to figure out our vegan menu because, like, everybody's got to have a vegan menu these days. And I'm just like, I cannot have imagined that conversation being who I sat next to accidentally 4 years. Like 4 years ago, that would have been like blown my mind, the biggest, thing. And now it's just becoming more normal all the time. And so even if there are other things we can look at that, are really depressing, I feel like that is a lot of positive change. And that 4 to 6 years ago, I couldn't even have imagined, like the things I'm seeing today that have become the norm would have blown me away, 5-10 years ago. And so that does give me a lot of hope. And I also, the other thing that I think gives me hope and that I tell to other people is there is a lot of social change research out there that suggests you don't actually need the majority of society or the population to agree or believe in something to change the world. That, and the estimates are wide and it's not super pinned down, but range anywhere from 10% to 20%, that if that portion of the population really strongly holds a belief or ideology, that is enough all on its own to create a massive ripple effect where we transform society and create a new norm, and everyone else just kind of follows along and joins that. And so I think that's really hopeful. And I look at other social justice movements and other situations where we realize, oh, it was only 5% of the population that were activists and thought this, and that got us the civil rights laws, and that got, all these different things. And so I see all the positive changes with food and plant-based, options and all these things that, aren't necessarily vegan ethics, but that I think are examples of this ripple effect, and that we could reach a tipping point where things shift much quicker than we ever predicted. And we could be so much closer to that than we even realize.
Yeah, 100,000% agree, even though I only need to agree 10%, maybe. But yeah, it's easy to get down, I feel like, but there's so many positives. And again, I've only been vegan for 3 years, but over those 3 years, it's been like crazy amounts of change. Actually, that's what a video I'm working on right now is about the future being vegan, but it's like so much change in such a short period of time. It's hard to not have some level of optimism, even though there's some hard moments too. A couple last questions to wrap it up. If you could pick one thing to tell someone that's not a vegan, what would you tell them?
I would ask them, I guess, what kind of world do you want to see? Do you want to see a world that has less violence, more peace, more justice, is more, compassionate towards everyone, more sustainable? And are you making choices? What choices are you making in your everyday life that are in alignment with the world you want to see? And how can we expect the world to become more just if we are continuing to justify outdated and old, unjust ideas by claiming they're normal or they're natural? And is that really the world? Would you rather see a world where we use normal and natural to justify all of our behaviors and how we live? Or would you rather see justice and compassion be guiding the world that we live in?
Solid. Same question, but now a vegan. If you could pick one thing to tell a fellow vegan, what would you tell them?
Stay strong, and don't forget that even though you're vegan, there are still so many societal pressures that many of us internalize and don't even realize, and to not let that get into your head. And especially when it comes to vegan parents or vegan health, I think sometimes when vegans face health problems, because of all of the propaganda and misinformation in society, it can be really easy for your brain, even if you're a dedicated or longtime vegan, to jump to, oh, is it that I'm not eating animal protein? Is it that I'm deficient in, who knows what? Maybe eating animal products will fix my health problems. And so I think if we want to fight that, we have to be aware of it. So if you are having those thoughts, acknowledge them and remember that this propaganda and brainwashing in society goes really, really deep. And that I think we all need to be aware of that. And I think that can help a lot of the ex-vegan stuff that we often sometimes see.
Yeah, we didn't get to get into that, but maybe in a round two, we'll just do a whole thing on ex-vegans, because I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts, and I certainly have a lot of thoughts. Cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about your channel and just where to find you? Of course, I'll link it in the description below, but do you want to tell us a little bit about your channel too?
Yeah, so my channel is Born Vegan, which I started because I didn't see many, if any, other, lifelong vegans sharing their story and talking about what it was like to grow up vegan. And it's broader than that. I talk about all things vegan related, just from my perspective of having grown up vegan, but I also use it to share my personal journey, my personal experiences, so that people can see it is entirely possible to thrive growing up vegan, raising vegan children, all of that. And I have a website called bornvegan.org. And yeah, I have a couple blog posts and articles up there, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram under Born Vegan as well.
Perfect. I will link all of that in the description below. I will find it and link all of it for everyone. Sarina, thank you so much for joining and giving your experience today. Everyone, you should definitely go check out her channel, Born Vegan, and watch her videos because they're very good. And I hope this conversation was eye-opening for everybody. But Sarina, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.